Returning to the room after dinner, Lightning urged Maisie to not hold back and to make that douchebag cry and beg for mercy. Maisie sat at the edge of her bed, her face hidden behind her hair, softly nodded, and said she understood. Lightning pushed aside her long white hair, holding onto her cheek, clearly recognizing that Maisie had no actual intention of giving Iffy a beating. Maisie looked at Lightning, her eyes reddened. "If Maisie doesn't make Iffy cry this time," Lightning said teasingly, "she won't bring the cowardly Maisie on any more adventures." Maisie hesitated, her expression even more teary. Another voice sounded from behind them. "Maisie isn't a coward," she interjected. "A coward couldn't have battled demons, and she even saved my life once." Emerging from the mist, Nightingale approached the bed and karate-chopped Lightning's head, telling Lightning she shouldn't have said that. The young girl held her head, admitting she just didn't want Maisie to back down when it mattered most. Nightingale sighed and gently held Maisie's hand. "This contest isn't simply between Maisie and Iffy," she said softly. "His Majesty Roland arranged this to make the witches of the Blood Fawn realize their mistakes and change their attitude towards other witches. There are many witches like Evelyn and Candle on the Slumbering Isle who've had similar experiences. If Maisie can teach her a lesson, in a way, Maisie is helping all of them." Nightingale gazed intently at Maisie, reminding her that she wasn't just fighting for herself this time but for everyone, just like when they faced the demons. Maisie blinked and gave a slight nod. With a relieved smile, Nightingale added, "Roland even said that if Maisie wins this time, Maisie will have unlimited ice cream sandwiches and pepper-grilled barbecue for a whole week, just for Maisie alone." Maisie's eyes lit up instantly, promising a decisive victory. The next day, outside the city walls on a grassy field, around 10 witches gathered around Roland. They overwhelmingly voiced their support for Maisie. Shadowfeather yawned, saying she won't be cheering for Iffy since she won't hear it anyway. Iffy slowly stepped into the designated area, looking coldly at Maisie across from her, thinking scornfully. If having more supporters meant victory, then the church would have unified the continent long ago. Mockingly, she suggested to Maisie that it wasn't too late to admit defeat now. Maisie replied with a determination that she wouldn't lose. Taken aback, Iffy wondered when Maisie had become so audacious to speak with such confidence. She scoffed, saying she'd lock Maisie up in a cage and never let her out. Standing tall, Maisie declared that Iffy wouldn't be able to catch her. The only one who could do so in the sky was Lightning. At the sound of the duel starting whistle, Iffy wasted no time, charging straight at Maisie. She arrogantly believed that even if Maisie had the Stone of God punishment, she still couldn't possibly defeat her, since she had undergone years of rigorous combat training. Little did anyone know the hardships that the Blood Fawn witches had been through. Maisie, in response, transformed into a small blue bird, swiftly soaring towards the sky. Iffy extended her arm in the direction Maisie fled, but her magical lines failed to hit their mark. The bird ascended higher and soon vanished from sight, leaving behind only a series of clear chirps. Frowning, Iffy looked up at the blinding sun, which hindered her vision. She sneered, guessing that Maisie planned to use the sunlight to cloak her presence. But what harm could a fist-sized blue bird do to her? Iffy closed her eyes, using magic to pinpoint Maisie's location. Suddenly, she tried to use her magical line to trap Maisie but continuously missed Maisie. As Maisie drew nearer, to Iffy's astonishment, she transformed back into her human form midair and pulled out a silver revolver from her waist. Before Iffy could react, she felt as if she'd been fiercely struck in the abdomen by a sledgehammer, followed by hits to her thighs and shins. Loud noises echoed, with dirt flying up from the impact. The intense pain rendered Iffy mute, her legs buckling beneath her, unable to support her weight. More shots have been fired, she collapsed, curling into a ball while clutching her stomach, her consciousness blurring. Through the haze, she spotted a white silhouette landing in front of her, who said, "You lost." These were the last words Iffy heard before she fainted. A raggedly dressed little girl was being pulled through the woods by another tall girl. The gravel beneath their feet was hard, and every step felt piercingly painful. The little girl pleaded with the taller girl named Annie to slow down, insisting that she was too tired and they couldn't escape. But Annie tightly gripped her hand, tugging her forward relentlessly. They were being pursued by the church's judgment army. The little girl, Iffy, shook off Annie's hand, saying she couldn't run anymore and her feet hurt really bad. With a soft sigh, Annie picked Iffy up, carrying her on her back. Even though this meant they'd move much slower, Annie was resolute not to leave Iffy behind. No matter what happens, they will stay together, Annie said firmly. As long as they hold on and find the Blood Fang Association, their protection will ensure their safety. The Judgment Army drew nearer, and suddenly a barrage of crossbow bolts shot towards them. Annie shielded Iffy, taking her to the ground and protecting her with her own body. The mounted Judgment Knights, wielding their weapons, closed in, now only about 10 meters away. But then, the uneven gravel ground they were on suddenly collapsed, and the soldiers leading the charge screamed as they plummeted into a deep pit. The remaining forces scattered in panic, but their horses unexpectedly fell to their knees, incapacitated. A group of figures in red robes emerged in front of the church's judgment army as if they had risen straight from the ground. It wasn't long before the judgment army was wiped out. The last one, attempting to flee, suddenly became a horrifying spectacle for Annie and Iffy. His body twisted grotesquely, with the harrowing sounds of snapping bones filling the air. His body then exploded. Following the encounter, the red-robed figures quickly stripped the fallen Judgment Knights of their armor, weapons, and belongings. They even took the Stone of God punishment. As the two girls watched these red-cloaked individuals, they realized they had been saved. Both fell to their knees in gratitude. One of the red-robed figures asked them why were they looking for the Blood Fang Association. Annie explained that they were both witches, and 3 others had been separated from them during the run. She hoped the Blood Fang Association could help to locate them and join the Blood Fang Association together. One of the red-cloaked individuals removed her hood, revealing long, fiery red hair. She stated they didn't have enough people to look for other witches. If Annie's companions couldn't make it here on their own, they weren't worthy of joining the Blood Fang Association. She added that even if they did make it, it wasn't guaranteed they would be accepted. Upon hearing this, Iffy felt Annie's hands grip tighten. The red-haired woman inquired about their witch abilities. After both demonstrated their abilities, the woman nodded at Iffy, signaling for her to follow, but told Annie she couldn't join the Blood Fang Association. Later, Iffy, donning a red robe, cried along the way, repeatedly saying she wanted to be with Annie. The red-haired woman, impatiently, scolded her, saying Annie was nothing but a burden. Iffy retorted, asserting that Annie was the combat witch they were looking for, and it was Annie who had saved her, telling them that Annie was very strong. The red-haired woman dismissively said whether one was a battle which was determined by the ability manifested during their awakening, not by physical strength. She believed Iffy only saw Annie as powerful because she was older. Annie's only abilities were to heat food and ignite wood, but the Blood Fang Association had no need for a cook. Blocking the red-haired woman's path, Iffy asked where they were taking Annie. The woman pushed Iffy aside, telling her it was none of her concern. Tears threatened Iffy's eyes again. The red-haired woman, with a furrowed brow, sternly told Iffy that their leader, Lady Heidi, despised the weak. If Iffy wished to survive as a member of the Blood Fang Association, she needed to forget about Annie and everything that had happened before. Heidi approached, inquiring about the commotion. The red-haired woman regarded Heidi with respect. Heidi glanced at Iffy and explained that the Blood Fang Association needed beasts, not weak lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They couldn't keep too many witches, the useless ones must be abandoned. Heidi then asked Iffy if she had heard of the mountain wolves. Iffy shook her head. Heidi elaborated that the mountain wolf was the symbol of the Wolfheart Kingdom and ruled the mountains. From one litter, 3 to 4 wolf pups might be born, but not all would survive. The mother wolf, based on how much she have hunted, would kill the pups that she couldn't feed, ensuring the others received ample food. Only offspring raised this way could survive the harsh mountain environment. Lifting Iffy's chin, Heidi told her that this was the revelation given to them by the gods, and Iffy had to become a beast. Terrified, Iffy looked up, only to see a mask reflecting cold light. She wanted to scream. Heidi, in a brainwashing manner, told Iffy that witches should be like wild beasts, and only such powerful witches deserved to live. Iffy felt an overwhelming force in her mind, as if every blood Fong association witch was repeating one phrase: become a beast. Annie! She screamed. Suddenly, she snapped her eyes open. Everything had vanished, leaving only a room ceiling and a hanging lamp in sight. Was it all just a dream? Relieved, Iffy sat up and noticed a young girl by her bed, curiously observing her. From the girl's unguarded expression, it was evident she had never experienced hardship or conflict. Introducing herself as Manhwa, she explained that King Roland had sent her to tend to Iffy's injuries. Asking if Iffy was still in pain, Iffy looked at the girl, thinking someone like her wouldn't survive a day in the Blood Fong Association. Manhwa, recalling something, guessed Iffy must be hungry and hurried out to get some food for her. Iffy rose from the bed, touching her abdomen. The pain was gone, but the humiliation of losing to a mere pigeon was something she couldn't come to terms with. She needed to understand what weapon Maisie had employed against her. Removing her clothes, her back revealed dozens of crisscrossing scars, resembling those from a whip's lashings. Looking at her in the mirror brought her back years ago. In a cave flashback, the whip resounded crisply against her back. The red-haired woman scorned, "Can't even endure this amount of training," calling all of them worthless trash. Iffy's mind wandered to memories from years past at the Blood Fong Association. She couldn't understand the likes of witches from Tilly's side, and even those from the city of Neverwinter. With hardly any capabilities to defend against strong enemies, how could they survive in this world where the law of the jungle prevailed? In the cave, there was only one piece of bread on a plate. 4 people, but just one piece of sustenance. Glancing at the bread, Iffy lunged at the witch nearest to her and started fighting for the food. In her world, much like a beast, only the most powerful witches deserve to live. Iffy was convinced that Heidi was right. Tilly's ideology is wrong. It's only because she had 2 extraordinary witches by her side. Without Ashes and Andrea, her position would have undoubtedly been overtaken. Iffy's mind went back to the days just before she left the Blood Fong Association. Heidi, in a fit of rage, had smashed a cup to the ground. She was infuriated that so many witches were willing to heed Tilly's commands. Heidi's expression darkened as she heard that Tilly said that the Lord of the Western Territory believed non-combat witches were equally important. Heidi believed these were just lies made up by Tilly. Who better than her knew what a lord or a king truly desired? She ordered Iffy and Shadowfeather to head to the Western Territories immediately to expose Tilly's lies. Heidi wants the 2 of them to transfer a message that Heidi was willing to offer King Roland much more than Tilly could. Strangely, at that moment, Iffy thought that Heidi didn't seem like the beast she always portrayed herself to be, but rather like an exasperated lamb. Iffy's thoughts drifted to Annie. On the night of their separation, Annie had lovingly warmed food for Iffy as she always had, taking care of her until the moment she saw Annie was knocked unconscious and Iffy was forcibly taken away. Her reverie was interrupted when Manhwa returned to the room, handing Iffy a freshly baked piece of bread. Looking into those pure, innocent eyes, something in Iffy's heart stirred. She murmured a quiet thank you. As Iffy ate, she asked Manhwa if she had said some weird stuff during her sleep. After some thought, Manhwa mentioned that Iffy kept saying she was a beast. However, Manhwa found it odd because Iffy clearly wasn't a beast. Iffy bit her lip and shook her head, implying that Manhwa wouldn't understand. But Manhwa smiled and remarked that they were both the same, humans. She added that while witches might have special abilities, King Roland had said everyone was human and all were the same. Iffy slowly made her way to Roland's office. As she stepped into the office, Roland noticed a change in the Blood Fong witch. Her stride wasn't as firm as when she first arrived. The caution and pride once evident on her face had diminished, replaced by a sense of bewilderment and uncertainty. After bowing respectfully and a long pause, Iffy finally spoke up, expressing her desire to know what Maisie used to defeat her. Nightingale pulled the revolver from her waist and handed it to Roland. Roland expertly removed the chamber, pouring out the bullets, explaining that Maisie had used a gun similar to this one. The bullets used in the duel had been specially modified to not pierce the body, otherwise, Iffy would have died on the spot. Holding a bullet up, Roland elaborated on the intricate process of its production. It required hundreds of ordinary townsfolk and 3 witches. Without either side missing, it wouldn't be possible. And these 3 witches were the non-combat witches Iffy often deemed useless. She looked hesitant, struggling to find the right words. Roland didn't give her much time to ponder, continuing his thought. While those witches might not directly confront Iffy with their abilities, what did it prove? An ordinary person might struggle to defeat a wild beast with mere fists and feet, but ultimately, humans dominated the world, not the wild beasts. Roland looked at Iffy intently, emphasizing that rather than calling them non-combat witches, Roland would prefer to call them support witches. The support witches have the ability that empower numerous ordinary people with new capabilities. Iffy murmured, but these weapons, in the hands of combat witches, could be even more useful. Roland shook his head, asserting that the difference wasn't significant enough to determine the outcome of a war. Assuming Iffy is up against 10 ordinary soldiers armed with the same weapon, how confident is Iffy in her victory? Roland could produce many such weapons daily, but how many combat witches are out here? Moreover, simply having weapons wasn't enough. To maintain their operation, a massive production and logistics team was necessary, and the role of support witches in this was irreplaceable. Reassembling the gun and handing it back to Nightingale, Roland explained that perhaps Iffy might not fully grasp it yet, but humans were superior to beasts precisely because of their wisdom. Magic was undoubtedly one of the best tools they had, and Iffy was wasting her inherent talents. Looking for a definitive response and with thoughts of Annie in her mind, Iffy hesitantly asked, "Can supporting witches truly make a difference?" Roland rose from his seat and assured Iffy that every witch had unique abilities and, when used rightly, could create unprecedented miracles. He told her with a smile that the 1st Army's reserve team would be conducting live ammunition training this afternoon and invited Iffy and Shadow Feather to attend. Iffy could see for herself what real power looked like. As he approached the door, he looked back at a bewildered Iffy, reminding her, times have changed. After a busy day, Agatha returned to the castle to find the sky had already turned to dusk. Upon opening the door to her residence, she was surprised to find Wendy waiting for her in the living room. Wendy's tone bore a genuine concern. She wished Agatha had come back earlier, at least in time to have dinner with everyone in the main hall. Agatha admitted she had lost track of time, too engrossed in finishing the latest batch of nitrogen. Wendy placed the dinner on the table, urging Agatha to eat while it was still warm. Agatha was somewhat touched. She hadn't expected Wendy, the most beloved witch in the Witch Union and trusted witch by the Lord, to bring her dinner. Wendy gently patted her shoulder, telling her not to be shy, and if she felt too tired, she could always ask Echo to sing her the Song of Springs. Wendy added with a smile, reminding Agatha that she too was a part of the Witch Union. After closing the door behind Wendy, Agatha took a moment before she walked to the table and lifted the lid off the insulated metal bento box. Inside was a 3-course meal with a soup, mouth-watering grilled steak, sautéed mushrooms, bread slices, and an egg soup. To her surprise, there was also a small plate tucked in one corner of the box, half filled with honey. She couldn't help but salivate. Agatha can't believe that Wendy has remembered her fondness for sweet things. Thinking back to the decade she had spent battling demons in Takara, food had become increasingly scarce. On ordinary days, the main dishes were grains and fruits grown by the witches, and while there was meat, its supply was erratic. As for luxuries like spices, sugar, and honey were very rare. Agatha loved sweet treats, especially honey. She hadn't expected Wendy to notice that detail. Considering her status and origins, she had specifically requested a separate living quarter from Roland, much like the top floor of her solitary experimental tower. However, now, the large room felt slightly empty to her. Perhaps, living with others wouldn't be so bad? Taking out the honey, Agatha spread it evenly on the bread slice, savoring the sweetness that warmed her from within. Nightingale then approached her with a bright smile.
After quickly finishing her bread, Agatha asked if Nightingale needed something. Nightingale relayed that Roland wished to see her. Agatha assumed Roland would remind her about the importance of balancing work and rest, and she responded that she'd be more mindful in the future. Nightingale winked, saying that wasn't the only reason, adding that Roland had plans to move against the demons. Upon hearing this, Agatha rushed out of her room. Barging into the office without waiting for Roland to speak, Agatha anxiously blurted out, "They can't even muster 10 fortress cannons at the moment, and how could Roland ever think of attacking the demon camp?" Agatha is afraid that Roland is making a big mistake.
Roland looked genuinely surprised, clarifying that Agatha had misunderstood him. He didn't intend to destroy the demon camp, but rather, capture a few demons alive to bring back.
Hearing this, Agatha's tension eased slightly.
And Roland went on to describe the abilities of a new witch and sought Agatha's insights about the demons, such as the duration the red mist they carried could last and whether their blood could be used to craft magical seals.
Agatha explained that a single container of the red mist could last a day. Roland then inquired if she could produce a magical seal if they brought a live demon back.
Agatha calculated for a moment and said, with enough materials, an independent lab, and 20 assistants, the success rate of producing a basic magical seal is above 80%. She then emphasized the importance of having both herself and Anna present during the demon capture. Agatha pointed out that the Witch Union had several evolved witches whose combined strength with the firearms would be substantial. They could protect themselves even against the most powerful demons. Moreover, Anna could activate the divine seal twice. Roland nodded appreciatively, thanking her for the suggestion. She bowed and firmly stated, defeating the demons has been her lifelong wish. She hopes that Roland won't disappoint her. As Agatha was about to leave, Roland stopped her, curious about her strong initial reaction to the idea of assaulting the demon camp.
Roland reminded Agatha of the first time they met.
Agatha had once not only advocated for an aggressive offensive against demons, even to the point of capturing possible chaos beasts from their camp at any cost. Flushing a deep shade of red, Agatha was slightly shocked. She couldn't very well admit that her previous stance had been made in a fit of pique. She had once thought Roland had neither the ability to fend off the demons nor a realistic assessment of his strength. Her perspective later changed with the improving situation in the territory, believing that, given time, humanity's power would grow exponentially. She coughed a few times, claiming she didn't recall ever saying such things.
Pretending to yawn out of exhaustion, she excused herself and left the office without looking back.
Walking through the corridor leading to the witch's residence, the cool evening breeze brushed against Agatha's face, soothing her mood. Gazing up at the starry sky, Wendy's words suddenly echoed in her mind. Roland will one day become the king of Grey Castle and lead us to victory against any foe.
That's what I believe, and so is everyone in the Witch Union. Seeing Wendy's unwavering conviction back then, Agatha felt a mix of envy and sadness.
She envied them for not being crushed by the harsh realities yet and felt sad because mere trust could not bridge the gap in power. But now, she was starting to believe too. Even though Roland was just a mortal king, he truly seemed worthy of trust. Iffy returned to her bedroom and sat on her bed. Images of roaring guns echoed in her mind, hundreds of people lined up neatly, pulling the trigger at the targets ahead. Apart from the thick white smoke, she couldn't see anything. Even if she could sense the bullets using magic, she would never be fast enough to trap the bullets with her cage. His Majesty did not lie. The power of the metal bullets far surpassed the special bullets Maisie had used during the duel. Targets made of wood, 100 steps away, were riddled with holes. And the weapon called the cannon was even more terrifying. Moreover, these were just the oldest models of field guns. The first army soldier claimed that their 152mm fortress cannon was much more powerful. Thinking about these weapons, it all boiled down to one thought: Heidi Morgan had deceived them all. Combat witches are not invincible as she previously said. Shadowfeather also looked complex, clearly shaken by the afternoon live ammunition training as well. She looked at Iffy,
asking what they should do next. Iffy shook her head, she didn't know the answer. Regardless of Heidi's previous intentions, it now seemed pointless, because Iffy knew that the Bloodfang Association could never offer what His Majesty wanted. The numerous support witches under Tilly were clearly more valuable than the Bloodfang's combat witches. Thinking about her experiences over the past years, she realized that her once prized abilities and power had become nothing but a joke. Except for Annie, nothing else was worth remembering. After a long time, she finally looked up at Shadowfeather, saying she didn't want to return to the Bloodfang Association anymore. Shadowfeather felt the same. Then she paused, looking at Iffy's reddened eyes. Iffy tried to wipe away her tears, but they kept flowing out. Only then did she taste the saltiness at the corner of her mouth, lifting her hand to touch her wet cheek. Realizing that she hadn't cried for a very long time. She has always been told that real beasts never cry. If only from the very beginning, she and Annie could encounter the Witches' Union and the border town, everything would have been so much different. Iffy really hoped that Annie could forgive her. The following day, the two went to Roland's office. The two no longer had their previous cautious expressions, their eyes were now filled with complex emotions. They explained everything to Roland, including the mission and history of Bloodfang. Roland asked if Tilly was aware of these matters. Iffy shook her head, telling him that Lady Heidi forbade them from revealing the past of the Bloodfang Association. And Lady Heidi rarely converses with Lady Tilly. Most of the other witches who joined the Slumbering Owl tend to be closer to Tilly. Even though some combat witches secretly agree with Heidi's words, most of them do not want to confront Ashes directly. After hearing the story about Bloodfang, it turns out that the burden on Tilly's shoulders isn't much less than Roland's. Roland silently reflected. Unlike himself, the rightful ruler of the Western Territory, the Witches of Slumbering Owl seemed more like a loose organization. Although Tilly was the leader, she didn't have the authority to dictate the actions of the smaller groups that had come to join. Furthermore, the Bloodfang Association itself was shrouded in mystery. As the daughter of the royal family, how could Heidi possibly not afford to maintain a group of support witches? It could only be said that she had never intended to take in those who she thought were useless from the very beginning. Unlike the previous witch association, which sought mutual protection for all witches, Heidi simply wanted a force of strong combat witches that could fight and die for her. Her obsession with the Wolfheart Kingdom made Roland even more cautious. Perhaps it would be necessary to write a confidential letter to Tilly, warning her to be wary of the Bloodfang Association's movements. Roland looked at the two witches, asking why they revealed the inner workings of the Bloodfang Association. Did they no longer listen to Heidi's command? Iffy bit her lip and lowered her head, saying they both want to join the Witch Union. Roland looked at her in surprise. Although he knew that the display of firepower would be a massive blow to these combat witches proud of their powerful abilities, he hadn't expected such a significant impact. However, he shook his head. Iffy had hurt Maisie, thus Roland can't just agree. Before Roland could finish, Iffy interrupted, asking Roland to punish her. She then began to unbutton her robe. Almost simultaneously, a pair of hands covered Roland's eyes. Iffy took off her robe, revealing her front, and turned back, to reveal her back filled with various whip marks. Roland was stunned. Nightingale immediately covered her with a cloth. Roland recalling what was said about the rigorous training within the Bloodfang Association, Roland could almost smell the scent of blood. In a deep voice, Roland demanded Iffy to put her clothes back on. Iffy looked at him fearfully, thinking Roland wouldn't forgive her. Roland suddenly felt a heaviness in his chest. After a pause, Roland told Iffy that if she wished to join the Witch Union, then don't bring the Bloodfang's ways here. First, apply to Wendy, and apologize to Maisie. Whether the rest of the Union accepts Iffy or not depends on Iffy's choice and future actions. Regardless, the city of Neverwinter is a home for all witches. Even if Iffy and Shadowfeather choose not to join the Union, they can both stay here. Hearing this, Iffy visibly relaxed, grateful for Roland's kindness. After watching them leave, Roland walked to the window, taking a deep breath.
With this, the team to capture the demons was assembled, but he didn't feel much relief.
Nightingale said, honestly, Iffy was lucky compared to Annie. At least she's alive.
If the Bloodfang Association was the only remaining witch organization in the Wolfheart Kingdom, those caught by the church or nobles would face a worse fate.
A question suddenly arose in Roland's mind: had Heidi Morgan really sent non-combat witches to other witch organizations?
Witches' contacts were rare and scattered to avoid detection, so how did Heidi get this information?
After all, given the life and death nature of their locations, leaders of various organizations likely wouldn't easily disclose their bases. And even if she knew, sending witches there would be risky. Would other witch organizations willingly accept these new witches?
The more Roland thought about it, the more suspicious he became.
However, Nightingale had confirmed that Iffy wasn't lying.
So, the problem seemed to lie with the very creator of the Bloodfang Association. With these thoughts, the danger posed by Heidi seemed even more significant.
Roland realized he should inform Tilly of these findings as soon as possible. She needed to start an investigation and be prepared.
The daughter of the Morgan family might not truly be loyal to the witches.